A cold, metal chair, a silent, dripping syringe. A final statement, then eternal silence. Since 1976, Louisiana has executed 28 death row inmates. Among them are names that sent chills through America not just for their crimes, but for what they left behind in their final moments: a strange meal, an unforgettable last word, or a haunting silence. In this video, we will trace the stories of the top 10 most brutal death row inmates in Louisiana, from their horrifying crimes to their final moments in the execution chamber. Before we begin, please leave a comment which country or state are you watching from. Let's see how far these stories have traveled. Now let's begin with the first person. First, Jessie Hoffman Jr. On the evening of November 26, 1996, Mary Molly Elliott, a 28-year-old advertising executive at a media company in New Orleans, left work late and walked to the parking lot of the Sheraton Hotel located in the bustling downtown area. She had no idea that Jessie Hoffman Jr., a valet, who had been on the job for less than 3 weeks, had targeted her for a premeditated kidnapping. At the time, Hoffman was only 18 years old. He used force to compel Molly into his car. He then forced her to stop at a nearby ATM where she was coerced into withdrawing money from her personal account in a state of panic. Footage from the ATM camera later became crucial evidence in identifying the perpetrator. Hoffman didn't stop there. He drove Molly out of the downtown area, crossing the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway into the remote woods of St. Tammany Parish. There he assaulted and murdered her, leaving her body in a secluded forest area. 2 days later, on Thanksgiving Day, a duck hunter stumbled upon Molly's body. Police quickly secured the scene and launched a comprehensive investigation. Detectives found her credit card wallet and other personal items scattered near the site. Along with the ATM footage and DNA samples, they were able to trace the crime back to Hoffman. Initially, Hoffman denied all charges. However, faced with overwhelming evidence, including bloodstains, fingerprints, and witness testimonies, he eventually confessed to his actions. On September 11, 1998, a Louisiana state court sentenced Jessie Hoffman Jr. to death for first-degree murder, kidnapping, and rape. The case shocked the state not only for its brutality, but also for raising questions about oversight and hiring practices in major hotel chains. On March 18, 2025, at the Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola, Hoffman declined a final meal and chose not to make a last statement. The execution process lasted 19 minutes. Witnesses reported that Hoffman exhibited convulsive movements before becoming still. Hoffman's execution sparked controversy, with his attorneys arguing that the method violated the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment, as well as infringing upon his religious freedom. However, the U.S. Supreme Court denied Hoffman's final appeal by a narrow 5-4 vote, allowing the execution to proceed as planned. Second, Robert Lee Willie. On May 28, 1980, Faith Hathaway, an 18-year-old from Mandeville, Louisiana, had just attended a farewell party before joining the military. On her way home, she encountered Robert Lee Willie and Joseph Vaccaro, who offered her a ride. Instead of taking her home, the two men drove her to a remote area in Washington Parish, where they committed a crime that shocked the entire state. Just 3 days later, Willie and Vaccaro struck again. They kidnapped 20-year-old Mark Brewster and his 16-year-old girlfriend Dobie Cuevas. The two victims were taken to Alabama. Dobie was tortured and Mark was shot twice, resulting in permanent paralysis from the waist down. Willie and Vaccaro were arrested in Arkansas on June 3rd of the same year. During interrogation, both men blamed each other. However, evidence, including physical traces, witness testimonies, and survivor identifications, clarified Willie's role in the series of brutal acts. In 1982, Robert Lee Willie was sentenced to death for first-degree murder. While awaiting execution, he became the focus of Sister Helen Prejean, a Catholic nun who spent time with Willie during his final days. Their story became the basis for the acclaimed book Dead Man Walking, which was later adapted into an Oscar-winning film. On December 28, 1984, at the Louisiana State Penitentiary, Willie entered the execution chamber. Prior to that, he requested a meal of fried fish oysters, shrimp French fries, and a salad. When asked for his final words, he looked at Faith Hathaway's parents and said, "I just want to say, Mr. and Mrs. Harvey, I hope you get some relief from my death. Killing people is wrong. That's why you've put me to death. It makes no difference whether it's citizens, countries, or governments. Killing is wrong." Robert Lee Willie, a name that continues to provoke debate about the boundaries of justice. For some, his death was a necessary punishment. For others, it serves as a stark reminder that justice encompasses not only the verdict, but also how we confront pain and the possibility of forgiveness. Third, Feltus Taylor Jr. On the morning of March 27, 1991 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 31-year-old Donna Ponzano was preparing to open Cajun's Fabulous Fried Chicken along with manager Keith Clark. Around 7 o'clock, Feltus Taylor Jr., a former employee who'd been fired 2 weeks earlier, arrived and was let in by Clark. Taylor asked to be rehired, but Clark declined. Instead, he offered to help Taylor find another job, even going so far as to call another restaurant to make a referral. While waiting for a new job interview, Taylor helped clean the dining area. But he later left only to return with a handgun. He threatened Ponzano and ordered Clark to open the safe. After taking around $800, Taylor tied Clark and Ponzano together. When Ponzano objected to the idea of rehiring Taylor, he shot her multiple times, then turned the gun on Clark. Taylor took an additional $580 from the cash register and fled the scene. Another employee arrived shortly after and witnessed Taylor leaving the restaurant. They recorded his license plate, providing crucial information for police. That same day, Taylor was arrested. He confessed to the crime-led authorities to where he had hidden the money and stated he had thrown the gun into the Mississippi River. Donna Ponzano died 2 days later from her injuries. Keith Clark survived but was left paralyzed with mild brain damage. Taylor was sentenced to death in 1992. While on death row at the Louisiana State Penitentiary, Taylor received spiritual counseling from Sister Helen Prejean, a Catholic nun known for her opposition to the death penalty. They remained in contact throughout his time on death row. On June 6, 2000, Feltus Taylor Jr. was executed by lethal injection. Before his death, he said, "I want to tell Keith and the Ponzano family that I've always regretted what I did. It was entirely my fault. After this is over, I hope you find the peace to move forward." Taylor's last meal included barbecued ribs, toast, onion rings, shrimp corn on the cob, and cheesecake. Feltus Taylor Jr., a name that reminds us of the heartbreaking consequences of violence and the missed chances to prevent tragedy. Fourth, Dobie Gillis Williams. In the early hours of July 8, 1984, a horrific murder took place in the town of Many, Louisiana. 31-year-old Sonnier Nippers was attacked in the bathroom of her own home. The intruder had entered through the bathroom window, which was later found with traces of blood and strands of hair. Sonia's husband, Charles Nippers, heard her screams and tried to break down the door to rescue her, but he was too late. Sonia was gravely injured and died shortly after being found in the living room before the ambulance could arrive. Police quickly arrested 22-year-old Dobie Gillis Williams, who was on a 5-day furlough from Camp Beauregard prison, where he was serving time for theft. Williams lived less than a kilometer from the crime scene. Authorities claimed he had confessed, although no audio or written record of the confession existed. They found a knife in the Nippers' yard and a shirt under the porch of Williams's grandfather's house, but no blood was found on the shirt. Williams was charged with first-degree murder. His trial was moved to Grant Parish for fairness, but he was sentenced to death by an all-white jury. His defense attorney was later disbarred for incompetence. During over a decade of appeals, many human rights organizations and individuals, including Sister Helen Prejean, raised serious doubts about the case, arguing that Williams may have been innocent. On January 8, 1999, Dobie Gillis Williams was executed by lethal injection at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. His last meal consisted of 12 chocolate bars and some ice cream. Before his death, he said, "I just want to say I hold no grudges against anyone. God bless all of you. God bless." Dobie Gillis Williams, a name that stirs deep debate about justice and fairness in the legal system. For some, his execution was a justified punishment. But for others, it remains a haunting reminder that justice must also be measured by our willingness to face the truth and uphold compassion. Fifth, Robert Wayne Williams. On January 5, 1979, in the city of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 26-year-old Robert Wayne Williams and his friend Ralph Holmes planned an armed robbery at the A&P supermarket on Perkins Road. It was a large, 24-hour store that usually had few customers during the night shift, making it the ideal time for them to strike just before midnight. Both men wore ski masks and carried a sawed-off handgun, a weapon easy to hide but extremely lethal. As they entered the store, Williams immediately pointed the gun at the night security guard, 67-year-old Willie Kelly, a longtime employee and a well-respected figure among locals. Meanwhile, Holmes attempted to grab the revolver holstered on Kelly's hip. The situation turned chaotic when Kelly, feeling threatened, reached for his own weapon. According to later testimony, Williams panicked and shouted, "Don't do it," and then pulled the trigger. The shot, fired at close range, instantly brought Kelly down. Williams and Holmes then rushed to the cash register, forcing the employees to hand over around $2,500 before fleeing into the night. The crime shocked the community as the victim was an elderly man known and respected by many. Just a few weeks later, an anonymous caller tipped off police about Williams's whereabouts. He was arrested and during interrogation admitted his involvement, but insisted the shooting was an accident, claiming the gun Holmes had handed him was supposed to be inoperable. Nevertheless, on May 30th, 1979, Robert Wayne Williams was sentenced to death. His case held particular significance. He became the first person sentenced and later executed in Louisiana after the state reinstated the death penalty in 1976, ending more than 2 decades without executions. While awaiting his sentence, Williams expressed deep remorse, insisting he never intended to kill anyone. He claimed the gun lacked a firing pin and was believed to be non-functional. Still, it discharged when he pointed it at Kelly. Williams also said he had found faith in Jesus and had been baptized in prison. On December 14, 1983, Robert Wayne Williams was executed in the electric chair at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. He declined a last meal. Before his death, he said, "I want to thank everyone who helped me. I will face this with dignity, and I want you to know I die with the truth in my heart, the truth that I never intended to kill anyone." Robert Wayne Williams, a name that marked the beginning of a new era in Louisiana's death penalty history, and a somber reminder of the severe consequences of violence and late-found regret. Sixth, Gerald Lee Bordelon. On the morning of November 15, 2002, in Denham Springs, Louisiana, 12-year-old Courtney LeBlanc vanished from the mobile home she shared with her mother and younger sister. No one could have imagined that the man who once sat at their dinner table, Gerald Lee Bordelon, Courtney's stepfather, was the one who had returned that morning to take her away forever. Bordelon, 40 years old, had a deeply troubling history of sexual offenses, convicted in both 1982 and 1990. Yet in the year 2000, after being released from prison, he married Jennifer Cokie, Courtney's mother, despite her knowing about his criminal past. Throughout 2001, Jennifer's other children made repeated accusations of Bordelon's disturbing behavior. But the truth would only erupt after Courtney disappeared. He took the girl to Mississippi, then brought her back to Louisiana. Their final stop was a remote stretch along the Inmates River. 11 days later, seemingly crushed by pressure, Bordelon led authorities to the site where they discovered Courtney's body. In 2006, during a trial that shocked the state, Bordelon not only confessed to his crimes, but also waived all rights to appeal. His reasons sent chills down many spines. "If I were free, I might do it again." It was the first time in Louisiana history that a death row inmate voluntarily gave up all appeals, embracing death as a necessary punishment. On the morning of January 7, 2010, Gerald Lee Bordelon entered the execution chamber at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. He was the first person executed in the state after an 8-year pause in capital punishment. His final meal was humble, reflecting Southern tastes: fried sac-a-lait fish, topped with crawfish, etouffee sauce peanut butter and apple jelly sandwiches, and several chocolate chip cookies. He ate in silence, offering no complaints. In his final moment, with Courtney's family and prison staff looking on, Bordelon spoke in a strained voice, "I'm sorry. I don't know if this brings closure or peace. It should never have happened, but it did, and I'm sorry." After a pause, he turned back to look at his own family, seated behind the bulletproof glass, and softly said, "I love y'all." And then everything fell silent, bringing a brutal chapter of an irredeemable family tragedy to a close. 7. Dalton Prejean. Dalton Prejean grew up in a life where tragedy seemed scripted from the very beginning. Born in Lafayette, Louisiana, in 1959, he was abandoned by his parents at just 2 weeks old and raised by his grandmother. His early years were marked by family instability, a lack of medical care, and inconsistent education. As he grew older, signs of developmental issues became more pronounced. His IQ was recorded at approximately 71 below average, and he was hospitalized multiple times for psychiatric treatment. Prejean exhibited violent behavior, but was often placed in juvenile facilities without sufficient psychological support. At age 14, he was sent to a reformatory for his role in a fatal incident involving a taxi driver. After being released a few years later in July of 1977, 17-year-old Prejean was pulled over by a Louisiana state trooper for a broken taillight. What happened next remains a matter of debate, but the officer never returned home. Prejean, still underage, was charged with the most serious crime under the law. The case drew swift and intense attention. A young black male with limited intelligence stood trial before an all-white jury against a backdrop of deep social and racial divides. Despite calls from human rights groups worldwide to delay the execution, Louisiana proceeded. On May 18, 1990, at the Louisiana State Penitentiary, Dalton Prejean, then 30 years old, entered the execution chamber. His final meal was a seafood platter, a childhood favorite served with a glass of orange soda. When asked for his final words, he spoke slowly with deep emotion. "I don't think this will accomplish anything. I've found peace within myself. I want to thank all the people who supported me over the years. I also want to thank my loved ones for staying strong. They say this isn't about revenge, but it's hard for me to understand or accept that. I hope they feel satisfied. So I give up my life. I send my love to everyone. God bless." Dalton Prejean, a name forever etched into Louisiana's death penalty history, not just for what he did, but for what society failed to do: protect a troubled youth before things spiraled beyond repair. 8. Elmo Patrick Sonnier. On the night of November 4, 1977, in a remote area of St. Martin Parish, Louisiana, 16-year-old David LeBlanc and 18-year-old Loretta Ann Bourque were enjoying a quiet evening after a high school football game. They had no idea that just hours later their lives would be brutally stolen. Elmo Patrick Sonnier, 27 years old, and his younger brother Eddie James Sonnier, age 20, approached the couple posing as police officers and accusing them of trespassing. They detained the teens and drove them to a remote area in Iberia Parish. There, Loretta was sexually assaulted. Soon after, both victims were shot with a .22 caliber rifle. 1 month later, on December 5, 1977, the Sonnier brothers were arrested. Elmo confessed and led police to the location where they had hidden the weapon. In their 1978 trial, both brothers were sentenced to death. However, after an appeal, Eddie's sentence was reduced to life imprisonment as he was under 21 at the time of the crime and heavily influenced by his older brother. While awaiting execution, Elmo Patrick Sonnier received spiritual guidance from Sister Helen Prejean, a Catholic nun. Their connection later inspired the acclaimed book Dead Man Walking and its Oscar-winning film adaptation. On the afternoon before his execution, Elmo was served his last meal, a humble yet complete Southern tray: a hot steak tender, green beans, chilled potato salad, buttered dinner rolls, a can of Coca-Cola, and a slice of apple pie. It was the final meal of a man whose actions once shook an entire state, and who now stood at the edge of life and death. In his final moment, as he entered the execution chamber at the Louisiana State Penitentiary on April 5, 1984, Elmo turned to Lloyd LeBlanc, the father of the slain David. Their eyes met beneath the cold light of the execution room. With a trembling but clear voice, Elmo said, "I can understand how you feel. I don't carry hate in my heart. As I leave this world, I ask God to forgive me for what I've done. And I also ask for your forgiveness." Then he turned to Sister Helen Prejean, the woman who had walked with him through his final days, and whispered, "I love you." Sister Prejean nodded gently and replied softly, "I love you too." Elmo Patrick Sonnier was executed in the electric chair at the Louisiana State Penitentiary on April 5, 1984. He was buried at Roselawn Memorial Park in a section typically reserved for Catholic nuns. 9th. Leslie Dale Martin. On the night of June 20, 1991, the summer heat settled over the city of Lake Charles, Louisiana. 19-year-old Christina Bergen, a college student with golden hair and a radiant smile, walked into a local bar to unwind after a long day. There, she met 24-year-old Leslie Dale Martin, a recently released ex-convict. The two left the bar together that night, and Christina was never seen alive again. Days later, her family reported her suspicious disappearance. Police launched a wide-scale investigation combing through the outskirts of town. It took 2 full weeks before Christina's body was discovered in an abandoned warehouse in Iowa, a small town not far from Lake Charles. Martin quickly became a prime suspect after witnesses reported seeing him with Christina on that fateful night. Upon arrest, he gave conflicting statements before being charged with first-degree murder. Forensic evidence, eyewitness accounts, and his own eventual confession helped seal the case. In 1992, following a dramatic trial, a jury sentenced Leslie Dale Martin to the maximum penalty death. He was transferred to death row at the Louisiana State Penitentiary, joining the ranks of the state's most notorious inmates. 10 years later, on May 10, 2002, Leslie Dale Martin entered the execution chamber. Prior to his death, he requested a last meal, not extravagant but carefully chosen boiled lobster Cajun-style crawfish, étouffée, a garden salad with Italian dressing oatmeal cookies, and a glass of whole milk mixed with chocolate syrup. A final attempt to reclaim a shred of humanity within the cold machinery of justice. When asked for final words, Martin said nothing. He lay still as the drugs entered his system. Then just seconds later, he turned his head toward his defense attorney, his companion through a decade of legal battles, and delivered a chilling final line. "You're fired." Whether it was a dark joke or bitter criticism, those were the last words Leslie Dale Martin left behind. 10th. Wayne Robert Felde. Wayne Robert Felde, a name now confined to legal records, was once a soldier in the U.S. military who served in Vietnam. But when he returned home, the scars of war weren't visible on his body, they were embedded deep within his mind. Felde came back to Shreveport, Louisiana, suffering from undiagnosed psychological trauma. He drifted through life marked by alcohol and violence, echoes of the battlefield he had once survived. On the night of October 20th, 1978, 29-year-old Felde was heavily intoxicated and taken into custody. When Officer Thomas Glenn Tompkins arrived to transfer him, a moment of carelessness turned fatal. Felde seized a weapon and shot the officer on the spot. The investigation moved swiftly. Felde did not deny the charges. He confessed entirely, claiming his actions were the result of an uncontrollable outburst, a consequence of unresolved war trauma. In 1981, Felde was sentenced to death. He filed no appeals, made no claims of innocence. He accepted his fate as if it were a release. Nearly 7 years later, on March 15, 1988, Wayne Robert Felde entered the execution chamber at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. He requested a simple last meal, pizza shrimp and ginger ale. No luxury, no farewell from loved ones, just a quiet tray of food served under the ticking clock. In his final moment, Felde did not cry or beg. He lifted his head, looked directly through the bulletproof glass, and spoke with calm defiance. "You can kill the messenger, but you can't kill the message." Then he closed his eyes and never looked back. Wayne Robert Felde, a soldier once sent to fight for his country, died at the hands of that same country. Not as a hero, but as a criminal, leaving behind questions that are never easy to answer about war, about justice, and about how we treat the wounded. Every execution doesn't just end a life. It opens a question for society: do we punish for justice or to soothe our pain? Every final meal, every last word is a small fragment in a greater portrait of humanity, guilt, and forgiveness. If these stories made you reflect, leave a comment. Where are you watching from and which moment struck you the most? Don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe for more true crime stories. We'll be back with more echoes from death row.